like our mothers knew we could. And we are hand in hand, like our brothers knew we'd be, like our sisters dreamed we would. We will soon be free. We won't fall behind. We won't fade away. We are looking for the sign of a new day. We are in the dark, waiting for a change. We are looking for the sign of a new day. We are marching on the promise of change, and we are fighting on, fighting for a better way. Oh, let us be the ones who live the dream. We have come this far by faith, and by faith we still believe. Oh, we won't fall behind, we won't fade away. We are looking for the sign of a new day. We are holding on, waiting for a change. We are looking for the sign of a new day. We are the voice, we are the power. This is the day, this is the hour. We are the change, and we stand together. We simplify, we say. We won't fall behind, we won't fade away. We are looking for the sign of a new day. We are holding on, working for a change. We are looking for the sign, for the sign. We won't fall behind, we won't fade away. We are looking for the sign of a new day. We are holding on, working for a change. We are looking for the sign, for the sign, for the sign, for the sign. Oh, we are looking for the sun, for the sun. Oh, we
Welcome to the Black Women's Economic Liberation Summit, brought to you by BlackHer and Liberation in a Generation. We are thrilled that you are here with us today. I'm Jocelyn Harmon, co-founder and editor of BlackHer. BlackHer is a media platform that was created by and for Black women. Our goal is to celebrate the leadership of Black women and educate and inspire each other to act for progressive change. We sincerely hope that today's event fulfills that mission. Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people. First, many thanks to today's panelists: Ann Price, Tracy Corder, Nikitra Bailey, Cassandra Welchlin, Michelle Holder, and Andrianika Morris for gracing us with their brilliance. Thank you also to Janelle Jones, who gifted us with a framework for creating good public policy for all people. It's called Black Women Best. Next, thanks to Solana Rice, Kendra Bozarth, and Katie Lee at Liberation in a Generation, who helped design and produce this special event. We're grateful to the Nathan Cummings Foundation, who provided the original funding for the Black Women's Guide to the COVID-19 Economy and this summit. Finally, a personal note of thanks to my friend and former colleague, Jeremy Greer, who taught me that good public policy is the path to changing our fates. Sandra Bland would have been 34 years old on July 14th, and I've been thinking about her this week. As you will remember, she died in jail after an officer pulled her over for failing to signal a lane change. It has always haunted me that she was not able to afford a $500 bail bond to get out of jail. Our criminal punishment and economic systems failed Sandra Bland. As Black women, our inability to build wealth puts our lives at risk. Without personal savings and assets and a network of people with access to money, we struggle to complete our college degrees, pay our rent, buy our homes in neighborhoods of our choosing, start our businesses, leave toxic relationships, receive good medical care, eat healthy food, even access clean water. We can't bring Sandra Bland back, but we can do so much better, and that starts by following Black women. Today, you'll hear from 6 Black women working to advance economic liberation for us. They are advocates, organizers, social workers, researchers, teachers, and writers, but most of all, they are great thinkers on what it will take to advance our freedom. If you leave with only one thing today, I hope it's this: Black women are the key to success. We know the path to prosperity. We have the skills to get there, and now is our time to lead. Now I'm thrilled to introduce you to Solana Rice. Solana is the co-founder and co-executive director of Liberation in a Generation, a national movement support organization building the power of people of color to totally transform the economy. Who controls it, how it works, and most importantly, for whom. Welcome, Solana.
Thank you, Jocelyn. This is such a great opportunity and time, and I'm so glad to share this space with you. Everyone, today we are daydreaming. We are dreaming, imagining, envisioning a reality that has never existed in this country, an economy that centers the liberation of Black women, a politic that hears Black women, a nation that treasures Black women. And I'm delighted to be with you all today to start dreaming and manifesting collective liberation. I imagine a place where we all belong, where we are all our whole selves, where we live our fullest lives. And the authors of Octavia's Brood offer that whenever we try to envision a world without war, without violence, without prisons, without capitalism, we are indeed engaging in an exercise of speculative fiction. So let's get writing. Our intention for today is to create a space to dream, to listen to each other, and to find fellow travelers. And I just want to be clear, we are talking about the fact that our current material position, our current economic situation as Black women is by design. Black Women Best, as Jocelyn mentioned, it means putting Black women at the center of progressive policymaking, ensuring that both our needs and our systemic disadvantages are accounted for and first. This means more inclusive and equitable policy change for all. Things like guaranteed income, we're seeing that at Magnolia's Mother's Trust. Targeting the unemployment rate for Black women, recasting our whole economic narrative so it's rooted in our actual lived experiences, not what the stock market is doing. So we want to be clear also about another thing, that we really do mean all women, that true liberation is dependent on dismantling all forms of oppression, including and especially what Black trans women and Black femmes endure. And so when we say Black women, we mean Black trans women and Black femme identified people as well. So a little just about Liberation in a Generation. We are a national movement support organization. We are building the power of people of color to totally transform our economy. And Black Women Best and other similar frameworks are a key pathway, just one pathway of many, to do this. We encourage your participation throughout the entire event. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions. Feel free to just, put some things in your journal that might be inspiring you. Really interact with the content today. We have a wonderful lineup, and we want to first start with a welcome video from Janelle Jones, the architect of Black Women Best and the chief economist at the Department of Labor. Huge deal. After that, my colleague and personal shero, Kendra Bozarth, will moderate our first panel. And so here's Janelle.
Hi, all. I'm so thrilled that Jocelyn and Kendra have brought this amazing group of people together to focus on the economic empowerment of Black women and the things we need to do to achieve it. They are both brilliant women who I continue to learn from and have, I'm sure, planned a truly visionary summit. I'm so grateful that they asked me to welcome you all virtually. We're at a really important moment for this conversation, and bringing our experiences to it will deepen it and add layers that we desperately need. The pandemic obviously exposed some troubling weaknesses in our economic system. A lot of it was new, a lot of it was stuff everybody already knew, and a lot of it was stuff we already knew. So much of the current conversation is catching up to a diagnosis and solutions advocated by Black women for years. But we also have an administration who have asked us to judge them on their commitment to structural change. The American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, and the American Families Plan are all opportunities for us to inject our voices into the conversation and talk about the big transformative changes that we need to more fully prosper in this economy and society. With my colleague, Alex Hertel Fernandez, I'm leading the Department of Labor's review of its program and policies in response to President Biden's executive order on advancing racial equity and supporting underserved communities. This EO is a big deal and a broad mandate and a great lever for thinking about how the department serves those usually left behind, including Black women. We're eager for bold ideas and meaningful assessments of how our department's programs have led to racial disparities in services, benefits, and enforcement. I hope you're as excited as I am about this conversation. I hope you believe that we can make a difference at this moment like I do. And I hope your discussions today are productive and exciting. So please communicate your thoughts to us and let us know how we can address your concerns. I'm always eager to hear from this group and look forward to working together. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, what a brilliant ray of sunshine. I hope each of you hold the same peace that I carry, knowing that someone like Janelle is not only pushing the economics field and the broader progressive movement to do better for more people, but she's also leading the way and taking up space for Black women and for workers of color. My name is Kendra Bozarth, and I'm the Director of Communications at Liberation and a Generation, and I'm also your moderator for our first panel. Real quick, I just want to say I've been fortunate enough to work closely with Janelle on Black Women Best before she joined the Department of Labor. Reminder, as its first Black woman chief economist, which is just pretty damn exciting. And so I'm feeling really energized that this first panel discussion is rooted in Black Women Best, and we'll be focusing on the ways to advance economic liberation for Black women and why this work is crucial for the collective good. So for me, Black Women Best is a strong, clear North Star to guide economic policymaking, but also as someone focused on narrative change, I think it is absolutely essential for rewriting the story of our economy. I think as everyone here knows, since the founding of this nation, people in power have used harmful tropes and racist narratives to position Black women as economic antagonists, but we have always been the protagonists, and we have always been central to envisioning and building a better future. And so today we're going to do more of that. Real quick, before I turn it over to my panel today, I just want to walk through a little common pushback that we hear, us Black Women Best proponents. I think what I hear most, and I think what Janelle talks about hearing most, is people ask, isn't Black Women Best exclusionary? And as you all have probably heard me say a lot, my short answer is we've been doing wealthy white men best for literal centuries. We can see what that's gotten us. And so I think Black Women Best pushes us to literally flip the script, try its antithesis, and center the most structurally marginalized instead of those who are always getting ahead. Another common refrain is, how does Black Women Best show up in the world? I'm always kind of happy to walk through and talk through these examples. That's part of what we're here to do today. But recently I've kind of been challenging folks, and I kind of turn it around and say, I'm curious if you can tell me where it doesn't show up, where it doesn't work. Because Black Women Best not only is a framework to help us build policy to undo our unequal economy, but it also forces people to confront the root causes. And without confronting those root causes, we can't pull them out of the dirt. So for me, it's a forward-thinking framework, but it's also a strategy to disrupt the status quo. So let's get started. Today we'll hear from Black women leaders about what's needed to end racial and gender wealth inequality, the ways they're working to redefine power and prosperity for Black women, and how we can all come together to secure our economic liberation. For our first panel, we have Ann Price, president of the Insight Center, and I would love to note not only the president, but its first woman president in the organization's 50+ year history. Next, we have Michelle Holder, professor of economics at John Jay College, and its soon to be associate professor of economics starting in August. And last but never least, we have Tracy Corder, deputy campaign director for ACRE, the Action Center on Race and the Economy. Thank you all for being here. Here we are. Hey, Michelle. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Ann. Just waiting for Ann, she's almost here. There she is. All right, cool. We got to wait till we're all together before we can get started. No one's getting left behind. That's the point of what we're talking about. Okay, so I'm going to float the first question. Obviously, we're here to talk about economic liberation for Black women, and so I truly just want to ask each of you, and Tracy, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. What does economic liberation for Black women mean to you? Whether you want to give us like some high-level visioning or a concrete example, I'd just love to hear that from you.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for this framework, for this question. I'm so excited to talk about it. So for me, I think about economic liberation, and it means upending this like deserving versus undeserving framework that we're taught to operate in. So as long as we believe that people are only worth as much as they produce, we will never have economic liberation. We are taught that the busier that we are, the more we deserve a break. And then we do this thing where we celebrate Black excellence by uplifting people who have successfully ducked and dodged and navigated through white supremacy without talking about why those white supremacist structures are there in the first place. So in a society that does not value Black women, in a society that casts us both as the mules and as like the face of laziness, having a framework that talks about deserving versus undeserving will never lead us to any kind of liberation. And then the second thing I'll say is that I really lean into a framework of abundance. So there is always this idea that there's this competition for like a very small amount of resources and wealth. And I don't believe that. If rich people can park their yacht in their yacht, then we damn sure can like go to work and take a vacation, right? And so we always do this thing, and I have to break myself out of it around like survival. Like, okay, we deserve basic human rights. We deserve basic this and that. And I want to say that we deserve more than the basics. We deserve to like thrive. We deserve to live in abundance. And then I'll finally say about the Black Women Best frame that now mayor of St. Louis, Tashara Jones, has always said that if we solve for Black women and girls, we solve for everyone. So this frame cannot ever be exclusionary, because anytime Black women succeed, we take everyone with us.
Yes, say it. Michelle, how about you? What are you thinking about? What does economic liberation for Black women mean to you?
Hi, Kendra. It took me a second to unmute. 1 year after all of these Zoom meetings, I still have to remember, unmute. Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here on this distinguished panel with these fantastic Black women. So in answer to Kendra's question, I think for me, as an economist, I spend, unsurprisingly, a lot of time looking at numbers, at data, and what I see all the time is that Black women as a demographic group in this country we as a group, we don't have the same outcomes as, for example, the demographic group in this country who tends to have the best outcomes, which is non-Latinx white men. And for me, Black women's economic liberation would mean that Black women as a group don't continue to experience inequitable outcomes. I believe that the key to our liberation at the center for me is equity, but underneath that umbrella would be accessibility, affordability, livability, and let me just expound on that. Affordable healthcare, affordable childcare for those of us who are mothers and parents, affordable housing, and the access to own our own homes that everyone else has, access to jobs that pay a livable wage. So for me, what I would like to no longer see is data that points to Black women being on the bottom rung of all of these major economic indicators that we examine, such as income, wages, wealth, mortality, infant mortality. So to some, Kendra, it would be no more inequitable outcomes for us. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I especially love this visual of this equity umbrella, right? And all of the things that fall under that we're not going anywhere without. So thank you for that. Anne, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, everything that's been said is great. And when I think about true liberation, I think we're really standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who really fought for liberation, not just for themselves, but for their communities and really for society at large, right? So we're in a moment right now where we're standing on their shoulders and asking, what does it mean to be free? And I think about my mother who said, only half of my life I was free. So we're now in a position to really think about what that means for our lives and for generations to come. So I think that we have to look at the lives, the problems, and the search for identity that Black women hold, this sense of individuality and self-worth in a world that operates to deny them of those values. And so when I think about liberation for Black women, these are some of the things I think we should be considering. We have to really examine the experiences of Black women against the restrictions of American society. And that means that we're exploring the complexity of Black womanhood and what enables us and holds us back from transgressing the boundaries of patriarchal stereotypes. And we know that those are the kinds of stereotypes that drive our economic systems. On one hand, we have this stereotype about Black maternity. And I love the way Barbara Christian talks about this. She says this ideal image, these idealized images serve as content for some major dilemma or problem that society can't actually solve. And such myths like delineate Black mothers as matriarchal figures, as superbly strong and protective. At the same time, they're selfless, all embracing, demanding little or nothing, and totally self-sacrificing, whose identities are just inseparable from their nurturing service, right? So you have this sense on one hand, but juxtaposed to that is Black women as purely workers, right? That they don't have this other life, this life that's valued. And so when we think about a history that demonized Black women who sought to care for their children and utilize public benefits, demonized them as freeloaders, even as white women were praised and celebrated for prioritizing their families over personal ambition. We have to think in this moment, how do we reconcile these two stereotypes that drive the way we shape policy for Black women, that take away and strip away their humanity and their dignity? Because really, over the past 400 years, that's what Black women have been fighting for.
Thank you. That was so powerful. I think, one thing you lifted for me that we've talked a lot about is the idea of wealth for Black women and what that means beyond the financial, right? Like the wealth of a legacy, the wealth of self-care, the wealth of community. And so part of that vision that I think you all touched on is like being able to nourish ourselves and our souls is also part of the economic liberation and what it can deliver. So thank you. All right, I'm going to hop into our next question. And Tracy, I'm going to throw this one at you. How do we ensure economic liberation is inclusive of all Black women? Pointing back to what Solana mentioned earlier about when we say all Black women, we mean all Black women. We mean Black trans women, we mean Black femme women. Again, we're all in this together. So I'm curious if you can talk about anything. What are the things we need to do to ensure that when we say Black women's liberation, we are not excluding anyone from that title?
Mm-hmm. I think this is an important question because, this world is built for cis, able-bodied, white, wealthy-ish men. And so anytime there's anyone who deviates from those identities, like there's gonna be issues. And that's not an excuse, but it's actually a demand that we do better and that we do better without like kind of asking for cookies for doing better. And so it's a part of the way we do it is just to do it and to move out of the way. I think it's sometimes hard because it means that we have to challenge the way we look at things. So many of us have like identities that like have compounding oppressions. And so for me, for example, as like a Black, dark-skinned, fat woman, like I might think, oh, I am the most oppressed and therefore I don't need to move out of the way. And that's not true. And so I'm constantly thinking about when I enter these rooms, who is not there, and do I actually need to give up my seat? We have fought so hard to like break down barriers that it's like almost difficult for us to see a time when we need to give up our seats, but there are times when that happens so that we can make sure that trans women and femmes are included. And so for me, it is really about making sure that we're doing that learning, that we're not demanding that other people do undue labor to teach us, and that we stumble and then we get up and we continue to do work without demanding kind of like a pat on the back because we've actually done a little bit better.
Thank you for that. And before I turn it over to anyone else, I just want to mention how often Black women consider the fact of needing to give up their seat, right? And how little the people who really need to give up their seats are not thinking about that. And so I challenge everyone in this audience, like especially non-Black women, like think about every time you enter a room, like, do I need to get out of the way? Do I need to be giving up my seat? Because yet again, I think Black women, as Tracy just literally spoke to, putting others first and putting the thought of others first. So thank you for that. Michelle or Anne, did either of you want to chime in on this question about how do we ensure we're being inclusive when we talk about Black women and mean all Black women?
Well, we don't have systems that even see Black femmes and trans women, right? We don't have data systems that measure well-being. We don't bring the life experience of trans women and femmes to the table often enough, right? And so in that way, we've made them invisible. And so I think just thinking overall about the invisibility of Black women and how that manifests across various Black women is really what we're fighting against. I mean, I think Tracy raises a great point about giving up our seat at the table, that, I think we can see, various forms of oppression. And we know that our oppression is bound up in one another. So, my freedom is tied to the freedom of a trans woman, of a femme. So they're interconnected, but we have to do much more to bring the true lived experience and understand this into our research, into our advocacy. We have a long way to go, but I think that starting with that premise of thinking about invisibility and what that looks like, and this sense of being tied to one another is going to be critical.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Michelle?
Sure. So, one of the things that we should probably acknowledge is that we're talking about policy change. We're talking about social change, but we're also talking about policy change, right? So Janelle, who I co-wrote an article about with respect to job losses last year for Black women as a result of COVID, she's in federal government, right? And so what I think needs to happen to ensure that we cover the diversity of Black women in our community, Black trans women, Black femme, Afro-Latinas, Black immigrant women, is that the policies that we advocate for, that we implement, right? Should we be in those positions, that we demand, right? From the outside in terms of organized groups, those policies have to take into account the diversity of Black womanhood. So, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, which is I don't want to see any more disparate outcomes for Black women. I want Black women to have equitable, equal outcomes. And so, but what does that mean? So for example, for a Black trans woman, I mean, we do know that the Black trans women in particular have been under physical threat, have, dealt with a lot of violence, threat of murder. Many have been murdered in this country. So our policies with respect to Black trans women in this country would really have to take into account their physical safety. I've written about Afro-Latinas in the US economy. I'm an Afro-Latina. My mother is from Central America. My father is African-American from Georgia. And, Afro-Latinas have their own specific needs as well. There may be language barriers. There may be immigration status issues. So when we demand, when we implement, when we advocate for policies that would improve our outcomes, we have to ensure that it is covering the breadth and diversity within our own community of Black women. Yep.
Thank you. That was incredibly on point. All of you. And Michelle, I'm actually going to come right back to you with this next question and then move it around the circle. I'm curious to hear just about, when it comes to Black Women Best and Janelle's framework, what progress are you seeing within your field of work? Are you seeing any traction? And this kind of circles back to the first question, but why do you think this framework is so important to moving forward?
Right. So I'm absolutely thrilled that Janelle developed this framework, because I just don't think it could have been sort of encapsulated any better, in that if we, and here I go again with econ speak, right? If we improve outcomes for Black women, in terms of our policy approaches and etc., it can only help but improve everyone's outcomes. That's just the truth. And so with regard to my profession, the economics profession, for those who may not know, it is quite dominated by non-Latinx, white, heterosexual, cis men. Okay, I think I've captured everything, and American men. And so I think with all of the upheaval and tragedies that happened last year, where we in this country and actually around the globe had to kind of look at what was happening in terms of Black folks, my profession, I think, did try to come to grips with that. But I feel that where my profession is only at the very beginning of acknowledging that race and gender are important characteristics in terms of one's potential outcome. I hope that this sort of acknowledgement is not temporary, but I have seen at least a superficial acknowledgement and willingness at least to consider that not everyone is homo economists. I'm probably saying that wrong, and I'm an economist, so forgive me, but not everyone is this, you know, utilitarian sort of, we're all the same. We're not all the same. And so, yeah, I think, Kendra, just to wrap up, I feel gratified that there have been conversations in my profession about Black women best. It's just my hope is that it's not it's not temporary and transitory.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of part of the strength of the framework, is that when people want to talk about working toward equity and inclusion, and they're like, yeah, but where do we start? Here you go. Here's a guiding post, right? Like, let's get going. But thank you for that. Anne, I'm going to go to you next, and let me know if you want me to repeat the question.
I think I got it. You can tell me if I'm going off track.
Cool.
You know, when I think about the work I've done on racial wealth and equality, I mean, certainly this framework could play an important role in moving the field. I don't really think that we've made the progress we think we have just because we hear about the racial wealth gap in the news all the time. And the fact of the matter is that every time we look at any number, we continue to see widening inequality. But I think you touched upon this, Kendra. You talked about going beyond the financial. Really, when we think about the legacy of Black mothers, of Black women. And I'm really, really, really interested in this kind of framework to help us really see ourselves, not just see these numbers, but see in some kind of an emotional center that we can tap into that really speaks to the lives of Black women. When we think about legacy, that means so much for us, right? That sometimes can't be easily measured. You know, when we think about a Black woman's knowing, and we know what that is, right? It's a wisdom, it's an understanding, and it's experience that Black women can bring to their families and communities that oftentimes are devalued. So I've been really thinking about this issue around stolen time and how that's really a wealth stripping mechanism. It's a way to actually stymie the potential of a Black woman's legacy. And what I mean by that is when you think about the jobs that Black women are pushed into, and I know Michelle's done so much work around this, when you see that those jobs that don't have the benefits, that don't have paid leave, that really are so stressful for Black women, and that the manifestation of that stress and the implications of that, and I talk about the times when a mother can't be fully present because they're so stressed about how they're going to get to the next day. That's stolen time from us as family members, us as daughters, as community members, right? And just add that up. That's not just one time. That's day after day, sometimes week, sometimes year after year. And when we think about the fact that by age 20, Black children are twice as likely to lose their mother, what does that mean for their life outcomes? What does it mean for the way that we are not able to really fully realize untapped Black genius? That's wealth, but we don't talk in this way, right? And I think that in some way we've got to, you know, and honor the work that economists do, but step away from some of the wonkiness of it to get at the heart of what we want wealth for in the first place, right? What's the point of wealth? But to bestow a sense of freedom, but to bestow a sense of, I don't have to worry if I, you know, that I can pay that light bill, right? I mean, these are the life experiences that we don't see in terms of wealth. And I'd love for us to expand that definition so that we can really tap into the life experience and know how that affects our economy and economic outcomes. So I think that we're in an exciting moment. We can use this framework to actually broaden how we think about wealth.
Stunning. You gave me goosebumps, to be honest. And I think part of, you know, one thing I heard you saying, which I think all four of us do in our work, is being the bridge between, you know, the progressive movement space, the policy space, the academic space, and like people's real lives, and like reminding folks that the work we're doing, yes, can be represented in data, yes, can be represented in reports, yes, can be, you know, assessed and evaluated and shared in all these ways. But really what we're doing this work for real people. We're doing this work so 20-year-olds don't lose their moms well before everyone else, so they don't lose out on this wealth, right? And Tracy, I'll turn it over to you. And then I have like one more like short question, and then I want to switch over to Q&A. And Tracy, let me know if you need a question recap.
I think I'm okay. I'm also like just trying to soak in all of this
I know.
brilliance on the panel. I'm like, yes, like, okay. So I want to speak specifically to the work I do around police and prison abolition. And so I think that traditionally that when we talk about policing, people think about reforms and people think about like when police kill folks. And we are in a space and a place that we are pushing beyond that. And we're talking about all forms of police violence. And when we think about it, I think that the kind of traditional model of that is thought about around like cis straight Black men. And so we see that in this like conversation that people will have that's like, oh, this matters to me because I have a Black son. And I do think that we're pushing beyond that in some ways. But even when you look at the murder of Breonna Taylor, for example, it kind of tragically what happened was she was turned a little bit into a social media meme. And so even though our consciousness is changing, and even though we are seeing some of the Black Women Best framework brought into this, it's not enough. Because if we were truly embodying that framework, we would understand that solving for police violence means that reform is not enough. We would talk about the sexual exploitation that happens at the hands of policing that specifically happens, you know, like more so to Black women than anyone else. We would talk about the ways that policing is actually counter to public safety. And we would acknowledge that it's Black women who have been on the front lines of this movement to bring attention to it. So I think that we're seeing this framework. I think that we are moving in the right direction because Black women and femmes and trans Black women have like been really, really pushing this, but it's not enough and we have more work to do.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, all of you. And I'm gonna keep it moving now to the Q&A. We're gonna do about like 15 minutes of this, and then I'll give you all a minute just to, if you wanna give like a wrap up statement. Tracy, I'm coming right back at you. What you know, I know you work a lot in the organizing space. And so one question we have is, how can we move collectively? You know, we're kind of doing this right now in this conversation, but how can we move collectively as Black women to secure our liberation?
So liberation is really, you know, a group participatory project. And I want to give a concrete example of something that I'm working on. So I'm working with an organization or coalition called the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. And we're really looking at what it would mean to repeal the 1994 crime bill and replace it with a democratically written piece of legislation that focused on actual community safety. And so what it is that we have acknowledged that there are people who work in organizations, who live in other places, who cannot go into a community and say, this is what you need to be safe. I live in Oakland now, but I'm from Milwaukee. And so I bet you if I went to Milwaukee and asked about public safety, there's a lot to be said, but they'd also be like, I need you to move my snow when it snows, right? Like that's a different way that they will talk about it than other people. And so I think that what's great about this coalition is that we are centering the experiences, the stories, and the work of people on the ground to like move forward something participatory. And we are clear that no one should go into communities and tell communities what they need, but that we actually have a lot to learn from communities. And as we know, a lot of the folks on the ground who are moving the work are primarily Black women. And so I think that's what, when we're talking about how collective liberation works, it's about like understanding that we don't have all the answers and we have to work together to like come to solutions that work for all of us.
Beautiful, thank you. Michelle, I've got a question for you. As someone who wants to learn more about economics, it is discouraging to see how often economics is framed in the same way with the white male point of view as the only reality. I talk about this a lot when people say, we've got race neutral policy. I say, that's white supremacy because it's assuming whiteness is the norm, right? So the question is, what do you recommend for someone who wants to study economics and how it can be a tool for Black women best? Shall we all just try to follow you to John Jay? I say, hell yes. But in all seriousness, they feel like there are almost no programs teaching these kind of frameworks. And if you could give a little guidance on that.
Sure, thank you, Kendra, and thank you for that question. So I'll try to be brief, but so I consider myself what's called a heterodox economist, which means that I know mainstream economics backwards and forwards, you know, the main theories, but I critique that, right? I critique that the best economic system is an advanced capitalist one. You know, I critique why do we have the term working poor in our country? So that, you know, so I think that there's a better way for our economy to be structured. And so in talking to you, the person who asked the question, if you are interested in looking in the economics discipline, but one that is not going to center necessarily white, male, cisgender American men, there are a few places where you could do that. I got my master's and doctorate in economics at an institution called the New School for Social Research in New York City. There's also the University of Massachusetts, both at Amherst and in Boston, where they have folks who are, I'll just call it non-mainstream economists, or sometimes we also use the term radical economists. There is also the University of Missouri at Kansas City. They have a graduate program in economics that is really very inclusive. So there are a couple of places in this country, if you're interested in the discipline, but you want an understanding of it and an education in it that is broad, comprehensive, and takes into account that capitalism, it may not be the best system for the mass well-being of us all. There are places you can go for that. And of course, There's also John Jay, where all of my colleagues are heterodox economists, and we have both a bachelor's and master's degree program. So that's my quick plug for the John Jay College institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I would follow you anywhere. So, but I'm not going back to school, so I ain't coming there. I'm not sure who wants to take this one. So just feel free to like raise your hand if you want to go first. And I just have 2 more questions. So this question is, how can we advance a liberation economy and Black women best framework in states with anti-Black and or regressive, I don't know why I said or, and regressive political environments? Again, how can we advance a liberation economy and Black women best framework in states with anti-Black and regressive political environments? I mean, I can go first real quick. I started my public policy career in Kansas, very politically regressive, but also very progressive, ironically. It's got these spurts and moments and people that are always on the ground doing progressive work. And I think my answer is be relentless, right? It's not really the best answer. That's kind of my communications philosophy. But I think that's kind of what we see across the country. You just got to keep pushing ahead and keep lifting the truth and go from there. Anyone else want to hop in on that? Tracy?
Sure. I mean, I would say I don't know what state isn't anti-Black and like regressive, but I do understand like the question as somebody who's like privileged to live in California. I would say, you know, like the local organizing is really important. That door-to-door conversation to conversation organizing is important. Part of the reason I think that we're seeing the right have this extreme pushback, this like public kind of trying to overtake the narrative is because they know that we're right. And they know that our organizing and the policies that we're pushing are good for everyone and they make sense. And so the minute that we actually have a conversation with someone, and the minute that we do that organizing work, we are winning them over. So I would just say continue to do that organizing work, continue to find like-minded people. I love to bird dog people. Kendra has seen this, which is like the act of putting elected officials in public, on the record, asking them the questions about why they are not working for communities. And so do that. I mean, it is relentless. You have to be relentless. I think that's actually a great answer, not a bad answer. And reach out to people who are like-minded, build those communities up and organize.
Absolutely. Anyone else on this, or we have one more question? Let me know. Good? Cool. This last question is a great question, but I'm a little biased because it's from one of my best friends. Can you talk about the importance of crediting Black women as the experts of their own experiences, and why Black women should not only be the target of progressive policymaking, but they should actually also be upheld and empowered as experts in progressive policymaking? Anne, do you want to kick this one off? Or not? I don't want to play.
So, you know, I mean, I just see Black women as experts in their own lives and really have across generations worked themselves to be at tables wherever they could to actually move our nation. I mean, I think and it doesn't matter if they were in Mississippi or if they were in California. I think that we, you know, oftentimes we talk about policy and think about who actually gets to shape policy, especially when decisions are really being made, when concessions are being made. We certainly don't often see Black women in that process. And so I think we need to think about how Black women positioned and how I've worked in communities where Black women came from the community, understood the problem, and then you know, got into to the system, like worked for the health department and were able to shape policy. We just need Black women at these tables at all levels. But I've always felt that Black women across generations have been the ones pushing and their lives being put forward. But we don't always have the structures to allow them to be at all levels of those decisions.
Absolutely. Tracy or Michelle?
I'd just add to what Anne said, and in terms of the question. So I do want to, take us back a little bit. Maybe I don't know how many of you in the audience would be familiar with the now deceased Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who did this seminal report in the 1960s, essentially trying to explain what were the problems in the Black community. And so he was a white dude. The gist of what he said was that a lot of the pathologies in the Black community could be traced back to strong Black women, in essence, that Black women had become these strong matriarchal figures in their communities, and thereby in a heteronormative framework emasculates, I guess, heterosexual Black men and dominates Black children, etc. Just basically saying that, Black women are at the root of some of these pathologies. And that report was so influential in terms of how social assistance benefits were then delivered to communities, the white community and the Black community, and white women and Black women, in that, there was this assumption that Black women had to be interrogated. We had to defend our need for assistance, etc. So my point in rehashing this old history is that, we have to be the ones who are making policy for ourselves, who are talking about policies, who are crafting policies, who are critiquing policies, and who are demanding policies. Because if we're not part of that process, we are vulnerable to experts who don't understand the reality of Black women and the Black community, and who make sort of racist, negative, broad-based assumptions about our community that have tangible impacts on us as a group and as a society. So I guess what I'm saying is, we have to be at the table. We must insist. We must push our way there, and fully engage in these policies that have long-reaching implications for the welfare of our community. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're reaching the end of this panel. I just wanted to give each of you, 30 seconds, a minute, just any remaining thoughts you want to share before we sign off here. Tracy, I'll start with you if you're good with that.
Sure. As I was listening to this conversation, I was thinking that not only do we need Black women in these positions, but we also need Black women who are following this framework in these positions. Because what we don't want is for people to escape accountability because they look like us. So we need Black women who are governing for Black women in these positions of power. And so just wanted to end in there and say thank you so much for having me on this incredible panel.
Thank you. Michelle, what about you?
Yes, I would just add to Tracy and Anne. I think one of the things that we as Black women need is actually each other in forums like this, in spaces like this, to connect, to talk about best practices, to compare our experiences, to ask for help, to say, did you experience this? How did you handle it? I feel that this is a real moment in time where we have our first Black woman vice president. We have, Black women who have joined key positions in the administration, in the federal administration, in the Biden administration, which is all great. But I still think that we need each other. And in that vein, I would recommend, and I make this recommendation to myself, to seek out, you know, a group of Black women that you can regularly connect to, you know, commiserate if you need to, lift you up if you need that. I just don't think there's any substitute. We can fight as hard as we want for the things that we want, but we also need to fall back on each other, because it's hard to do these things by ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you for lifting like community and solidarity. And also now I'm coming to find you in New York City as soon as possible so we can spend some time together. Again, last but never least, just a closing thought or two from you, please.
Well, so many great things have been said, and I totally agree with both what Michelle and Tracy has put forward. And, you know, I just think that in the work that we do right now, we've got to also think about how we counter and combat the narratives about Black women that drive the outcomes that we see, that drive the policies that we see. You know, we have to keep our eye focused on anti-Blackness and how it plays out and how it's gendered, and what it means for folks with multiple identities. And so you know, when I think about the National Welfare Rights Organization and the fact that Black women joined with other women, not only to talk about the structure of our economy, the fact that Black women had a right to care for their families, who talked about a guaranteed minimum income, you know, that they were really talking about a future that we're now fighting for right now, right? And they also really were digging into the narratives about poverty and how they were tied to Black women. And we haven't seen a movement like that since. And so we need greater investment there. It still is so much about how we think about Black women, and narratives about the fact that we are supposed to be so strong that we shouldn't ask for help, right? So there's a long way to go there, but I always feel just a deep sense of connection when I'm with Black women in these spaces, and we're really pooling our ideas and our dreams together. It just opens up a world of possibilities.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I love you all. I'm endlessly grateful for each of you and for your work. And I just really appreciate your time and your insights always. So thank you for being here. I'm now going to hand it over to Solana Rice, my colleague and super friend, to knock us off with panel 2. Thank you again, everyone.
Fantastic all. I hope you all were inspired by that conversation. I'm definitely gonna hit up Tracy over in Oakland. I think we're making new connections even on this call. Thanks everyone for your questions. Keep them coming in the Q&A. Love your reactions throughout. You can follow on Twitter as well. So today we're going to talk about guaranteeing Black women best through a set of economic guarantees: guaranteed income, guaranteed wealth, and housing. So this is the conversation where we get a little more specific about what are the policies that could help, some of the policies that could help drive Black women's economic liberation. We purposely use the term guarantees because these, along with several other provisions, are what we think everyone in this nation should have the right to, that our prosperity as a nation, largely built from the labor of Black women, means that we can afford to create the conditions in which everyone thrives. So we'll be dropping links in the chat about the details of these policies, but in short, a homes guarantee, for example, would ensure that housing affordability reaches into the middle class and that tenants are protected from landlord speculation, essentially decommodifying housing. A guaranteed income is a regular check, no strings attached, for those who need it. And guaranteed wealth is the idea of what is called baby bonds, where every child in the nation would be endowed with a seed of capital in a federal account. And all of these proposals are delivered through the federal government, and they serve not only to materially benefit people of color, we're talking about cash in pocket, an affordable home, something to hand on to the next generation. So it materially benefits people of color and Black women and Black people, but also it really challenges the notions of deservedness, of anti-Black racism and austerity. A lot of what we heard in that earlier panel that we need to combat. And we can combat those not only through our narratives and our stories and who we center, but also in our policies. So we have a stellar panel this afternoon. It includes Andronika Morris, Executive Director of Housing NOLA, Cassandra Walchin, co-founder and co-convener and state lead for the Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable and the co-founder and director of the Mississippi Women's Economic Security Initiative, and Nikitra Bailey, Executive Vice President at the Center for Responsible Lending. Welcome all. Oh, it's so good to see your faces. I'll start with this question. This is an opportunity for you to tell us about your work, but also about your vision. You know, I personally think it's quite a blessing to be able to do work that aligns with my values. And I want to hear from each of you briefly how you see your work advancing your vision of Black women's economic liberation. Let's start with Nikitra.
Thanks, Alana. And let me say how excited I am to be here as part of today's discussion. The first panel was just simply brilliant, and it's just really great to be a part of today's discussion. So let me tell you how my work at CRO just really builds on the hard-fought gains of the civil rights movement. And I'm going to the civil rights movement with a very intentional focus, because sometimes we don't talk about the focus that the March on Washington was about jobs and freedom, which is so critical and essential to all the work that we're doing right now. So we work to really end predatory lending practices so that they can stop draining our hard-earned savings, so that we as Black women can actually have an opportunity to build wealth and really have an opportunity to pass along for the very first time intergenerational wealth. And I'll get into details later in our discussion about what that lack of opportunity has looked like. But so much of what I'm trying to do is to bring to reality that our financial services sector is really built on our community's economic exploitation, including the banking sector itself. Many people don't even understand that the bodies of our enslaved ancestors are the foundation of banking in America. So much of the wealth that we see in this nation is built off of the reality that we work to help other people become wealthy. As Angela Rye says, we built this joint for free. So my work is really centered on fixing those public policies that really cause this exclusion and that has really put us in a position to be at an economic disadvantage and to give Black women, our families, and our communities a fair chance to really have an opportunity to thrive, not for thriving state, but thriving as democratic members of our society, because economics undergird everything about the American experience.
Thank you for reminding us that the bodies of our ancestors provide the foundation of banks and financial institutions in this country, that we would not have an economy, that the economy that we started with was intrinsically and combined with our racial caste system. Let's turn to Cassandra, your thoughts.
Thank you, Solana, for having me. This has really been an amazing panel. The first panel was a summit. The first panel was so incredible. Anna, when she ended, she really invoked my grandma. And I heard this song, and I'm gonna just have to sing it for a minute. And the song was, nobody told me the road would be easy, but he didn't, what is it? Nobody
Didn't
told
bring me
me.
this far to leave me.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I didn't finish the song, but that's it. And so Anna, you invoked my grandmama, and if I had a handkerchief, I would wave it like that. And I really believe, for me, it's been such a blessing to do this work. And it's like it's being passed on. It's being passed on to me. And I just felt just so blessed to be able to carry on what our ancestors put out into the atmosphere for us. We are, their legacy. And so I am my grandmother's legacy. And so the work that I do, and I tell people all the time that my mother's work taught me what justice was, but yet my grandmother's life taught me what service was. Because my grandmother took in my mother and her siblings who were foster care kids, because they were in abusive situations, and she had a mother who had to leave Mississippi to go to New York to get better treatment because Mississippi wasn't treating Black people for tuberculosis. So she went over to New York to get better treatment and ended up getting murdered in New York. And then so this amazing grandmother took in, my mom, and yet my mother was a low-wage worker making $2.13, and took me to work with her and hid me in the maid closet with her colleagues so that she can go out on the floor and do her job, but she couldn't leave me at home. And so my playtime was in that closet, right? While she goes out. And so no mother should have to choose between the child that they love and the job that they need. And Marian Wright Elderman says that so perfectly. And so I have a great opportunity right now to really make sure that no mom, no Black woman should have to sacrifice those two things. And so I am very intentional about making sure that Black women are at these seats of power, because what's unique about my story is that my mother worked in the building that was right across the street from the state capitol at the seat of power that could have, with stroke of a pen or a vote, raised her wages where she could have a living wage so that she wouldn't have to hide me in the worker's closet, because that was my childcare story. And that's just my story, because there's so many other stories. And so I feel blessed to be able to carry that legacy on and to make the playing field straight, and to make sure that we center Black women front and center in our policy making decisions and in the budgetary process as well. And so moving a women's economic security initiative in the state of Mississippi has been such a joy, and also a necessity, so that they don't forget who we are in this state and in this country and in the South, that Black women has always been at the center of every crisis, every environmental, economic, social, movement. And we will demand our seat at the table. And so I am very intentional on making sure that our voices are there and connecting it back to people's kitchen tables, particularly Black women.
Well, Cassandra, closet childcare, you have me right there. And making the decision between the child you love and the job you need. We have enough. We don't need to make those kinds of choices. Andronika, I'll turn to you to answer the same question. How do you see your work advancing your vision of Black women's economic liberation?
Thanks, Alana. And I'm so thrilled to be on the second panel of this amazing event talking about centering the economic liberation of Black women. And I want to thank Nikitra and Cassandra for their words earlier. It certainly helped put everything in perspective. And I'm the housing part of this three-legged stool, as you talked about. And I was so excited to hear you say when you opened this about guaranteeing these basic needs are met and guaranteeing housing, because that is how my work as an advocate has evolved over the years. We say put housing first, not because we want to ignore education, healthcare, racial justice issues. We think all of those issues are impeded by our failures of the last 50 years of the modern housing market to address housing and to destigmatize the racial and gender issues that keep housing in the closet, that keep housing as an issue that somehow, some way, it's not integral to our economy, right? We look at the stock market, we look at the unemployment rate, but we do not allow ourselves to consider a community's cost burden when we're determining whether or not that economy works. We're not looking at the cost burden for housing in this country when we're trying to determine whether or not our economy is heading in the right direction. And that is part, and the reason for that is centered around Black women, the stereotype, one of the most persistent stereotypes around that stops affordable housing from being a front and center issue, from a housing guarantee being what we all demand, is the welfare queen stereotype, which is that of a poor Black woman with too many children. It hypersexualizes, it evokes irresponsibility, it talks about laziness and shiftlessness and all of the things. And we don't even have to say welfare queen anymore. You just have to say affordable housing. You just have to say Section 8. You just have to say renter. And it does, and the dog whistle is blowing and blowing and blowing. And we see it play out in policies, and we've seen it play out most effectively and to our detriment, our collective detriment during COVID, when every single elected official, executive across the country said, before there was a vaccine, you need to shelter at home. And none of those same leaders, Black, white, Republican, Democrat, Green Party, progressive, none of them did a damn thing to see that the people of America could guarantee themselves housing over the last 15 months. None of them. And as we try to dig ourselves out of this, we continue to bypass the issue. So, and again, it is the image of Black women that is used as a cudgel against the rest of this country, as a cudgel against us. And so we as Black women are going to have to stand up and fight this ugly stereotype and put it to bed for all time, so that making sure that we benefit first, because we have been disenfranchised the worst. And yes, also to our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community, for whom housing is a special crisis. We also have to talk about that. We have to talk about that boldly and succinctly and without flinching away. So I'm glad to be here with you all today and to dig into more of this.
Andronika, I'm actually going to pull up with you again. You mentioned that housing is so important for literally every single person in this nation. We have, when we talk about our economy, sometimes if you listen to like NPR, sometimes they'll talk about like housing starts, right? How many houses we're constructing, but we know that those aren't necessarily being constructed for people of color, Black women, Black people. So we have this like pretty random, it's not random, but it's like, it's not really a germane number for us in terms of understanding how the economy is doing. We know that there is not a single place in this nation where someone working full-time and making minimum wage can afford a one-bedroom apartment. Housing is like such a critical issue. Housing affordability, stability. You mentioned it, especially for Black trans and femme people. Like, what is holding back affordable housing from your perspective? Could you imagine a world where we all had a place to call home? What is keeping every single political party from not talking about affordable housing?
Well, it's the racial bias, right? It is the unsung civil rights issue of our time. We say Black Lives Matter unless they mean come live in your building or live in your block. Then the most progressive person you will find is all of a sudden saying, well, do we want Section 8 type people living in our neighborhood? It is a racial and gender issue, and we have to first confront that. We have to be honest about that. And this is where respectability politics, where people of color aid and abet inside of the system of white supremacy, right? We start talking about we start grasping onto the model minority. And that's what happens when you hear people talking about home ownership starts, right? And home building starts, and how many homeowners have you helped create, without looking at programs that disenfranchise those homeowners, that prevent that from being wealth that is passed on to the next generation. We have seen study after study after study. We've seen these programs, particularly after there is some kind of crisis, be it Hurricane Katrina and Rita, or the 2008 financial crisis. We see investments made in those communities, and Black and brown people who may have had homes at the start of that crisis, at the start of that catastrophe, who don't get assistance. And what you hear the administrators talk about is, well, we want to make sure people don't get too much, that they don't take advantage of too much. That my favorite one is, we don't want them to have a nicer house than they had when the catastrophe started. God forbid. God, I mean, it is.
And we did not say that when veterans returned from war. We said, oh, everybody should get a good GI Bill. Let's do it. People should get good homes.
But it's only when we're talking about this issue, and it's because when what they're saying is, you don't want those Black people to continue to not work and to continue to sit on and take up their pace on the government dole. That's the coded language. That's the dog whistle. And sometimes they don't even bother to code it. And that is, and so yes, I do. It is what I'm working towards. It's what I believe in. I've given myself a time limit, because we can do this. We have to do it. And so we can't keep turning in place. We can no longer accept the unacceptable. We can no longer accept the feckless nature and the political cowardice of people who come every 2 years, every 4 years, depending on what the office that they're sitting in, and then they don't put housing first. They don't put people first.
Nikitra, we know that statistics about Black women's median wealth is being just a couple of $100s. We know all of that. We know, obviously, that home ownership plays a big part of building our wealth. In your work to protect consumers and advance fair lending, what are you seeing as the root causes of these statistics about wealth? What's not being said when we're trying to explain why this atrocious wealth position exists?
So let me step back though, because Andronika got us into something that I think we've got to talk about a little bit more. She's absolutely right that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on Black women in our communities. Right now, we know that Black women continue to have some of the highest rates of unemployment, and many of the jobs that we held are not coming back. And that will get me to the point about the root of the wealth gap. But I do have to say that there are some Black women in power working on these issues. Quite frankly, I'm in a public policy realm. Maxine Waters is the chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, and she did a tremendous job during this COVID-19 experience to fight to make sure we got significant resources for housing. I think what Andronika is really lifting up, though, is that we always have to have a two-pronged strategy. We have the federal strategy as well as a state strategy, because we work to secure those dollars at the federal level, quite frankly, including $10 billion of assistance for struggling homeowners. And there is provisions in that work for those funds to go to socially disadvantaged communities, which is foundational in housing, because socially disadvantaged communities, by definition, are Black, Latino, Asian American, and Pacific Islander and Native. So we have some foundational things done at the federal level because of that leadership, but we also need the state pressure. And I think one of the panelists was speaking about community power earlier on one of the other panelists, on the earlier panel. She was speaking about the need for community power. And we need those kind of dual things happening at the same time, that when we do secure those significant federal victories, we have people on the front line pushing those state policymakers to really get the change that we need. Many of the issues that we're fighting today are state-based issues, and we need to make sure we have dual strategies for federal and state. So getting to this kind of history, I think she's absolutely right that housing is so fundamental to wealth inequity. I mean, the very wealth of the nation was built from this idea of property property, right? Like this whole idea that the people who hold the wealth hold the property happened to be, again, our ancestors, right? We were the enslaved people who were the property, and the property built from that. And then all of the public policies that emerged from that, including the Homestead Act of 1862, that, you know, said, let's expand across the United States and create a larger nation. What we did is we favored whites and we gave them access, and we did not give it to Black families. Quite frankly, at the time we were still enslaved. And then when we followed up with policies after that, so we saw Reconstruction provide, you know, the very first federal Fair Housing Act. People don't even know that the 1866 Act actually provided for this opportunity for fair housing, but we didn't get it because there was no enforcement with it. So when we got to New Deal, we put in practices, whereas our grandmothers, just think about this, our grandmothers worked in a sector that could not qualify for Social Security insurance. So when Cassandra's telling her story, that hits, right? When our grandmothers transition, there is no security for them, even though they've worked all of their lives, quite frankly, because they were housekeepers and they did other service-related work. And then when we get to home ownership opportunity, we know in the first 35 years of the FHA Insured program, only 2% of those mortgages, those affordable down payment mortgages, where people only had to have a little bit of money to get access into homeownership. Solana, you mentioned the GI Bill and all of those New Deal things. So we gave whites this kind of easy opportunity to own. And then when we get into the system, we face predatory practices. We face wealth extraction. And we're at a moment now where we've got to have brave, bold, unapologetic policies that really call for us just throwing the system on its head. It's time to build a new system that centers us in our communities, and to do it not just because of the previous inequity, but the truth of the matter is the system won't work without us. The subprime lending debacle showed when you ignore abuses in Black communities, all of the economy suffers. So we know that there are 3 million mortgage-ready Black consumers ready to become homeowners right now. We know what we need to do to get them into homeownerships. Because of the history of wealth discrimination, we don't have money for down payment. So we need to have first-generation down payment assistance, because that alone will help us grow Black homeownership by 1.7 million new home buyers. We also need to stop pretending about student loan debt. We know that America has had a history of investing in higher education, a history of it, land grant universities all across the whole country. But it wasn't until we started to see this Black and browning of America that, you know, we get this fear of higher education opportunity. And we saw this retreat again from the Great Recession, where states stopped putting those resources in. So we are in a situation today where we have, you know, about a $1.8 trillion student debt crisis. That's holding back the economy. We know that Black families disproportionately have higher levels of debt because of previous generational discrimination. We also know that it's killing our economy overall. We know that, you know, our economy could actually grow by $1 trillion a year if we just address the discrimination that Black people face in it. And we would create thousands of jobs and generate billions of dollars in local revenues. So all of these things are policy choices. And my colleague, Ashley Harrington, would kill me if I don't say this on this panel today. We need $50,000 in student loan debt cancellation, period. And we just need to ask for it very boldly. And it's something that the Biden administration can do in an administrative way without any help from the Congress at all.
Ooh, Nikitra, the system will not work without us. That is so right. And Cassandra, I'm curious, because Nikitra started out by talking about these parallel dual strategies, and we know that just because we win fights at the federal level does not mean that's going to translate to actual dollars on the ground in states, that we have to have a federal and a state strategy, because these states have a lot of discretion in how they actually administer these programs, even when we fight so hard for them at the federal level. Are you seeing that in Mississippi? This is a softball question, by the way. Are you seeing that in Mississippi? Are you seeing that, you know, some things that are working at the federal level do not necessarily translate? What do people say when you say, like, the system will not work without Black women in Mississippi? What are you saying?
Yeah. So I say we're creating it. So it's working because we're creating it. And it's going to work because we are developing a model on how to do it. And, you know, it's very interesting. And, you know, Aranika, you know this, and Nikitra, I'm not sure where you're based, but, you know, working in the South is a place that it's hard. You know, it's a hard place to work in, but it presents opportunities for us to develop the kinds of strategies that will move decision makers. I remember when Trump was elected, we started getting calls from people around the country saying, man, how are y'all doing? I feel so sad, so sick. And the only thing we said was, welcome to the South. Now let us teach you. Because we have developed a muscle around how to do good progressive policy, grassroots organizing, and strategy development to really do what we need to do. Not saying that we have, you know, done it all, but we do know that that arc is bending. And so some of the examples that we have been doing is that, yes, we have to work at the federal level, state level, and local level. So some of the policies that we are doing, and it really is this integrated advocacy strategy that takes into account the organizing, the communication, the research, right? Sometimes we have to do a legal angle in that with other partners. So for instance, with our Women's Economic Security Initiative, that was really founded and informed by people on the ground, women on the ground across the state. We held these town hall meetings across the state, and we asked just one question: what do you need to be economically secure? And they said there was 11 things, but the top 5 was wages. They needed better jobs. They needed, no, it was childcare, wages, access to health care, better jobs, and better protections against domestic violence and sexual assault. And number 6 was housing, right? And so we said, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. This is what you said you need. So we're going to form a policy agenda, and we're going to take it to your decision makers. And so we did in 2015. That's what we did. And just one example of how we done that. So we knew wages was really important, right? And we knew that our folks were not going to be the decision makers. They were not going to increase minimum wage. We're still at $7.25 here in Mississippi, which is poverty wages. Like, what can you do? You can't do nothing with that. And the pandemic has even more showed that. And our governor this past weekend, you know, stopped the unemployment insurance that our folks could have had. He said, no, we're not going to do that. People need to go to work, but you go into a $7.25 job. So, but inside of that, we began to do our research, and we began to see that equal pay was an issue. In the state of Mississippi, we're the only state without an equal pay law. And we have the widest wage gap in the country. And so Black women make 56 cents on the dollar. She is losing, we are losing over $21,000 a year. Over the course of her 40-year career, she would have lost about $849,000 that could have gone towards retirement. On the other panel, they talked about, what does liberation look like? It looks like joy. It looks like taking a vacation. It looks like getting my nails done when I want to, buying a Brahmin when I want to do that. It looks like investing in my children. So she has lost all of those wages, but yet we are half the workforce in Mississippi, 2/3 of the minimum wage earners, but yet we are not getting paid what we're worth, right? And so what we did, we said, well, we're going to continue to fight this at the federal, at the state level. And so we had advocacy day at the Capitol. And so we have a three-pronged strategy. So at the state level, we said, well, we want to make sure that you know that Black women and women in the state are not being prioritized at the table. So we're going to bring them to you. So on Advocacy Day, we had little slices of pie that we put on every legislator's desk. And we said, women deserve a bigger slice of the health pie, of the housing pie, of the childcare pie, of the wage pie. And we gave them just a little bit to whet their appetite to even more and begin to drive a dialogue. And the dialogue was, why you gave us just this little bit? And we said, well, why you give us just that little bit in your budget, in the state budget? But that has become our signature event to really talk about, you know, women's economic security and our wages, and that we need a state law to protect our wages and give women remedy. The second thing we did is that at the mid-level, we have developed a strategy called Equal Pay Committed Cities, where we are getting mayors involved, because we understand that we got to work this thing top to bottom. And so we've now asked mayors to come on board and become equal pay committed cities, meaning that you are championing equal pay. You are looking inside of your own municipalities to see where there is wage discrepancies, that you are not putting in harmful policies like salary history, requiring salary history on job applications, that we know is based on a wage, a previous wage that was already discriminatory based on race and sex. And then the last one is at the local level, real local level. We have something called the pocketbook campaign. Pocketbooks, and women, y'all know our grandmothers and our mothers used to talk about the pocketbook, right? And that little change, but that little change put people to college. It paid that grocery bill, that light bill, right? It paid for shoes. They did a lot with that little big pocketbook. And so now we're asking women to tell your stories, tell us your pocketbook stories. And then we want you to send them to us. And next legislative session, we're going to lay the grounds with pocketbooks so that these legislators can also remember that women's pocketbooks supports Mississippi's economy, right? And if you pass the equal pay law, $4.15 billion will go back into Mississippi's economy, and it will cut the poverty rate in half. That's just one way in which we are working and doing this policy making and really centering Black women at our policy table. And then the last thing I'll just say about this is we have to keep our women at the table, because it's very hard. It's very hard because they're struggling so much. And so we help them connect the dots that your kitchen table is impacted by what happens at the state policy table. And so we're going to do the education with you, but we're also going to equip you with the tools to hold your legislator accountable. Now let's have a town hall in your community, and then you bring them to the table and say, why didn't you pass equal pay? And why didn't you prioritize us in this budget? So that's the work that we're doing.
Cassandra, what I want to lift up here is, one, the rigor with which you all are bringing Black women into the entire process of policy advocacy, of policy development, from understanding the real needs to actually engaging real folks and bringing them to the halls of power. I mean, this is what it's about. I also just want to lift up something that I feel like we don't talk enough about, but that these are tactile, real physical things in this land of Zoom and virtual conversations. The idea of bringing artifacts, the pocketbook, the slice of pie, does wonders in our advocacy for embedding those images in each other's brains, right? We're just never going to forget that story that you just told, and neither are those legislators. So I just want to lift that up as a point of creativity and intention. And I have a couple of questions for Nikitra and Andronika. And this is a question that comes from Marquita, and I'm wondering if you can speak to it in the topics of housing and or any other topic, but I'm curious about housing specifically because we see this a lot. Marquita asks, how do we put forward policies targeted to Black people that specifically redress historic inequities in the context of a political and legal framework focused on equality? Our government's ability to take action in this regard is hamstrung by an insistence on equal treatment, while we need differential, race-conscious, and equitable treatment. And I feel like we see this in housing a lot. We see this disparate impact that we have to keep proving over and over again. But I'm curious, from your perspective, how are sort of this how is that showing up in your work, this focus on equality? Andronique, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So that is one of the things that we do every day at Housing NOLA. The plan itself, like we talk about the organization, but Housing NOLA is more than just an organization. It's also a plan, a strategy, and a process that uses data to design a policy framework and insist on that policy framework being implemented. And then when it is implemented, holding our elected officials accountable and thinking through, using research. It takes time to conduct the proper analysis, to do the research, and to make sure that communities' voice is included in that. You can sit in your ivory tower and do a lot of research and get everything right, but you've got to make sure that you're talking to community and that their voices are necessary and in order to hold the elected officials accountable, but to also set the priorities, right? There are a million things that need to be done. Which item goes first, right? When you look at the impact, when you look at the investment, there are no good choices. Community is the only one who should be empowered to make those choices, to say, this community goes first, this block goes first, this issue goes first, this goes second. And ignoring that, we ignore that at our peril. And to the question about making sure that you are really, instead of just landing on the aircraft carrier and saying mission accomplished, we passed policy X, we got referendum Y voted through. We've got politician with this history into office. We have got to show up, and it's got to be a continuum. We've got to come back and say, did that actually work? And not simply, that's not just on those elected officials and getting those policies put in place, but how we're doing our investments, right? If we stand up and brag on the fact that we created, for example, 165 first-time homeowners in the last 3 years in New Orleans. That's an accurate number. That's a conversation we had last night. How successful are those 165 homeowners going to be? How much money did you put into that? How much money do you have left over for programs like that? Are you really looking at it? And the trials and tribulations that those homeowners will face are knowable. There are things like the taxing policy and our code enforcement policies, the hostility of the market when it comes to making sure that those homeowners have access to the capital to rehab their properties. Let's build out the continuum, and this is all knowable. It is not, one term that sets my teeth on edge, particularly when you're talking about policy, is unintended consequences. Unintended consequences is it's what happened when small-minded, simple people design policy without any care or regard for anything other than, can I say I did this? Can I check this damn box? And most of the time it's not even unintended. It's, well, do we really want to do that? And we've got all of these examples in New Orleans and in all across the country when unintended consequences are ignored as we're designing policy, as we're implementing programs, as we're voting, as our policymakers are trying to help us, our elected officials are speechifying. And we have got to stop that. So to the question, it is absolutely possible. It's hard, no question, but it's not, none of that's harder than what we're doing right now. What we're doing right now is communities like New Orleans are dying. We're slitting the throats of these cities. And we're all gonna look up and go, well, what happened in New Orleans? What happened? That I remember the hurricane hit Did they ever dig themselves out from underneath that? No, we did not. No, we have not. The COVID and on and on and on. And again, it's not just the hurricanes. It's not just COVID. It is the original sin in this country. White supremacy and chattel slavery. That is what New Orleans and communities like New Orleans are continuing to be poisoned by. And until we can stop those things, until we all agree, and I mean, it feels hard, like, oh, we can't change hearts and minds. I don't really need to change any hearts and minds. Can I get you to follow the law?
I'm so grateful that you went there, because I think we definitely need agendas. Jocelyn knows this about me. I am an agenda person. We as a community have to collectively set our agendas and then hold policymakers accountable for them. Policymakers should never set our agendas, period. Our issues are not progressive or conservative. They are simply right. We are fighting for justice and equity. Those are moral questions. Those are not political questions. So she's absolutely right that we need to set an agenda. But we also have to understand that the system is working exactly like it was designed. Like, it's no accident that we are in the situations that we're in. It's no accident that COVID-19 devastated us. We literally died at disproportionate rates of COVID because of redlining. And we've got to just call it what it is. The truth of the matter is we've created a system to really protect the powerful. And now we've got to use our seats at the table. And that's why I brought up Chairwoman Maxine Waters. That's why I'll bring up Secretary Marsha Fudge, because we have powerful women that we can partner with from the policy advocacy side. That's my work. That's what I do, that we can talk to, who understands and brings the proximity of our experience with them to work every single day. But we've got to take them solutions that are going to solve the problem. And I dropped in a link to this down payment assistance program because it gets exactly at the point of the question that Solana raised. We've got to design public policy in a way to fix the discrimination of yesterday. And we've got to do it without fear. When people say it can't be done, that can be done. When I tell you there is $10 billion in the American Rescue Plan for struggling homeowners, there's a provision of that $10 billion that has to go for socially disadvantaged individuals. That's something that I pushed along with colleagues from the National Fair Housing Alliance and other housing policy advocates, because we understood what we did wrong at the last crisis. The Great Recession left our communities out and everybody fled from supporting homeownership. The reality is we shouldn't be held accountable for exploitation in the system. In fact, part of why we have a housing affordability issue is because we could no longer get foundations to support our housing programs. So lenders stop building housing. All of these things in this ecosystem are interconnected. Housing accounts for 20% of our overall GDP. So when we step back and say, no, Black and brown people don't deserve home ownership, we've increased them into rental home ownership. So we've pushed people into rental, driving up the cost of rents all over the country. And now we're in cities and rural communities where nobody can afford to pay their rent. And we've got to be honest about that. So we need to have bold solutions like the targeted down payment assistance that focus in on first generation. And then we have to be race conscious. And if you look at that proposal, it's a two-step program. First, to come up with the money. We're not asking for anything less than $100 billion, because that's exactly what we need to get it done. And then the second thing is to make sure HUD and DOJ does a study to show that focusing on income alone is not going to solve the race issues. We've tried these income-based solutions over and over again. Our communities are not progressing because we are trying to fix race with income, and it's not going to work. So we have to be very bold, and we have to just say, now is the time to do it. And it's not just good for us, it's actually good for everyone, because again, when you leave us out, you end up paying for it.
Nikitra, go for it, Cassandra, go for it.
No, I was just saying, this is so powerful, because what you're talking about, Nikitra, is really, and Andronika, I mean, we're talking about, right, structural racism, right? And you all both have said that they think they're just hurting Black folks and Black women and communities of color, but really you're hurting yourself too, because we all are interdependent. Our systems are interdependent, like on each other. And so we're hurting each other. The other thing I would say, I agree, it's not just about race, right? Like it's not, because these kind of policies have been proposed and have been talked about, you know, guaranteed income, you know, UBI, universal basic income, right? Universal housing, like these are things that have been talked about long ago. I think I also look at the human development index too, that the United Nations and, you know, other countries use. How do we measure happiness, right? And how do we measure different people's capabilities? So we want people to be happy. We want people to be liberated, but that comes with, yes, housing, that comes with income, but that comes with a set of values, you know, like what's the set of values that we're using? And so I think it's so important that we are in these kinds of positions to speak truth to power, equipping our people. And Andronika, I keep thinking too about during the pandemic, there were foster care girls on university campuses. When the campuses closed down, these girls had nowhere to go. These young men had nowhere to go, and they ended up going into households that already had violence in them, right? And now they're being moved all around. And so the instability of that. And so you just made me think about structural racism, but how we got to talk about it in the sense of race and gender. And we got to talk about it too at this intersections of economic justice and making sure that we're doing, Nikitra, what you're talking about too. This is a moral issue. And that's why we want to push for a moral budget, right? So
from each of you, I'm like, why are we running out of time? Where is the time going? Why are we not just having this conversation all day long? But we're at time. We're at time, and I want to hear from each of you one sentence. What should people be doing? Nikitra, you mentioned we have powerful people in power. And powerful Black women in power. What should we be doing? What should we be knowing? One sentence from each of you. Nikitra, go for it.
So Solana, you know, I'm not the queen of the one sentence, so I'm going to take two. Just gonna go ahead and take two. We should hold power accountable. Absolutely. This is a moment for us to achieve everything that we need to. But we also have to have that faith and that confidence in ourselves and in our collective vision. And the word that I will leave us with is Ubuntu. Like, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
Andronika.
So yeah, I would echo everything that Nikitra just said. And my one sentence will be is you need to get engaged around the fight to address housing, to end housing insecurity. Everybody has these partners in their communities. They are often the stepchild and ignored. Join those efforts, push those efforts, uplift those efforts so that as our national partners work, that the city and the states, because this is where it all goes sideways. And again, echoing Nikitra's comments from earlier. So I'll say it simply like this. Fight for policies that put housing first. Show up and offer your voice to demand that housing is put first.
And gosh, I wish we had more time. Ladies, we're gonna have to do this again with the first panel and this panel, but I'll just say this, that it's time to shift power. But we're going to shift power at the policy table, but we can't forget about voting. Voting is going to be key. And so Black women, we vote at higher rates than anywhere else. In particular, in Mississippi, we have the highest voter turnout during presidential elections. And so let's continue to shift power at the voting booth and at the policy table.
Oh, So much to sit with. So I need some, I have been drinking water. I hope everybody was hydrating because that was a lot. Thank you all for your time and your insight. I'm going to give the spotlight back to Jocelyn to close us out.
I've been hydrating. I have my water. Wow, what an amazing event. I want to thank our amazing panelists again, Ann Price, Tracy Corder, Michelle Holder, Cassandra Welchlin, Andronika Morris, and Nikitra Bailey. I also really want to thank our amazing moderators, Solana Rice and Kendra Bozarth. These were incredibly powerful conversations, and if I have anything to do with it, they'll continue. Before we close today, I'd like to ask you to keep an eye on your inbox for a special follow-up message from us. When you registered for today's summit, we asked you 2 questions. First, what is your vision for a liberated economy and society for Black women? In short, how will we know when Black women are free? We're going to end today's summit with some of your reflections. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take good care.
I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains still binding me. Yeah. Wish I could say all the things that I can say when I'm relaxed. I'd be starting anew. I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. Don't leave me. How sweet it would be to find that I could fly. I'd soar to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. Wish I could break all the things that bind us apart. Wish you could know what it means to be me. And you'd see, you'd agree, everybody should be free, 'cause if we ain't, we're murderous. Wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be. I could find that I could fly soar to the sun. Look down and see, then I know, yeah. it's moving now. I know, got news for you, I already know. Jonathan Livingston Seagull ain't got nothing on me.